Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Rappin' with the Rep. I know it's been a while since Rappin' with the Rep was out, but we're back for another season. Kind of like Curb Your Enthusiasm. We took some time off. And we're starting with a bang here because our first guest since our time off is Senator Jason Lewis from Winchester. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be a guest on Rappin' with the Rep.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason. So we're here because this session I was assigned to be the House Chair of the Joint Committee on Education, and Senator Lewis is the Senate Chair. And it's really exciting for me, first of all, on a personal level, because we've worked together since since even before I was elected 12 years ago, on many bills. We worked together on paid family and medical leave. We worked together on a bill called Common Start that deals with preschools. I'm going to talk a little bit about that because that work continues in our committee. But we've really made we've achieved a lot together, and so it's really exciting to be able to continue to do that.
I'm thrilled to be chairing the Education Committee alongside you this session. As you said, we've worked on so many important issues in the past. We know how to get things done in the legislature, and I'm excited about what we can get done in the education space this session.
Yeah. So what our responsibility is we do pre-K through 12 and libraries, and so that's our area. We're going to talk about some of those priorities that we have in that area, some of the things we've already heard bills on that are moving, and then some of the things that are coming up. And so, first of all, one of the things we did this week was we had a hearing on something that I know is of interest to both of us, and it's the bills that restrict access to cell phone use in school, during school. We have about maybe a dozen or so bills about that. And as you pointed out during the hearing, there were none in the last session.
Right.
So this interest has really mushroomed right now. Maybe let's talk a little bit about your interest and what we think we're going to be doing.
Sure, and maybe it's worth just mentioning for folks who may not know, we have over 300 bills total, I think, in the Education Committee. So those are all bills that were filed by our colleagues, reps and senators, that pertain to educational policy. And so those got assigned to our committee, and it's our job, to first of all provide a public hearing for all those bills, so the public can weigh in on them, and then to also evaluate and review all those bills. And so there's a lot of work we have ahead of us, but it's really interesting work. And so, as you said, this. Was it earlier this week?
That was
earlier this week. The hearing we had included all the different bills relating to cell phone use by students in schools, and I was quite surprised because I was the chair of the committee last session, and we had no bills that dealt with this issue. But as you pointed out, this issue has just gotten so much attention nationally, and I'm also been hearing a lot more about it in my own school districts. More parents, have come to see me and have said, we're working on it at the local level to restrict cell phones and other devices in schools. What are you doing at the state level? So I thought it was great to get all the testimony. I thought we heard very powerful testimony from a whole host of different stakeholders, basically urging us to put in place a statewide policy that would either completely ban the use of personal devices during the school day or restrict them. And really help students, with their academic performance, and also to improve their mental health. So I found it very powerful. And I don't think we heard any testimony against taking action. No,
especially when it was limited to the bell-to-bell portion of these bills. We didn't hear anything against, right? And like you said, I was in Burlington yesterday. I spoke with the principal at Burlington High School. He asked me about it. I think our schools are looking for some guidance on how to do it, and I think it's universally accepted that the cell phones coming into schools are a distraction. They're a distraction to learning. We'd heard from one witness who talked about how it is easy to cheat when kids have these devices and are bringing them into class. But teachers, again, they want some guidance so that people are treated the same. And I think this is one of those bills where from municipality to municipality, it's good to have some uniformity to this. The towns and the cities can tailor it to their needs. as they see fit. But basically, the goal will be the same.
Right, because right now they're all on their own. You know, each
Right.
school district is struggling with this on their own, and some have policies, some don't yet, and so they leave it up to individual teachers to do what they want to do in their classrooms. And I don't think that's a great place to be.
Yeah, so some of them have policies where the students put the phones in a bag or a pouch. It's locked up. They come in, they get it when they come out. That's one way to do it. Others have policies where at lunchtime they can have their phone. We did hear some testimony as to where that may or may not be the best way to do it. But again, we could leave it to the school districts to come up with the detail of it.
Yep.
But we heard no testimony that says it's not a good idea to put some restrictions around that.
Yeah.
So it's something that we're going to be working on fairly quickly, I think,
Yes.
to bring out.
Yeah, I think there's a sense of urgency to move on this issue. Hopefully in the next few months.
Yeah, yeah. Now, another thing that we did this week was we just passed, both the House and the Senate, a supplemental budget dealing with surplus funding that we got from the Fair Share Amendment for our schools and transportation. And among that was something that the superintendents have been really asking for, is to what's called fully fund the circuit breaker. And what that means is that when students need out-of-district placement for special needs, the municipality has to bear a cost for that, both for the tuition from the schools, but also the transportation, and the transportation can be very, very high. By our state law, we're supposed to be funding that to 75%. That's what we call fully funding. The municipalities would pay 25%, the state would pay 75%. But because of budget constraints, especially on transportation, we've only been contributing 44%. That leaves a lot of money for our towns to pay. So as of, and I think that was yesterday, right? We voted in and sent to the governor as part of the budget that this will now be fully funded. So I was really glad that we were able to address the needs of the superintendents
Totally
essentially
agree with
right
you.
away.
Yeah, I think we've all been hearing from our communities about just the escalating cost, especially of special education. We are seeing more students that need special education services, particularly after the pandemic, and the services they need in many cases are more acute, which is also more costly. And of course, some of those students can't be served in the school district because the district just doesn't have the services that meet their needs, so they have to be placed in special programs, which is good for the student. It's what we should do, but it's costly. And so it's very important that the state, provide those reimbursements. So I was thrilled that both the House and Senate were in total agreement on this. And as you said, we both voted yesterday to send the bill, to Maura Healey's desk. And it includes all the funding necessary to get to that full 75% reimbursement. And the other thing we should mention is that was to make up the deficit for the current fiscal year, but also in the state budget, which is going to be wrapped up hopefully in the next few weeks, for next fiscal year, both the House and Senate also made sure that there's enough money to cover the circuit breaker completely for next fiscal year as well.
So that won't happen again.
So it won't happen again, yes.
Yeah, this is important for any number of reasons. It's important for the families who are facing these issues because in some districts where where money is tight, there's a financial interest in keeping the kids in district where it may be that their best opportunity is to be educated out of district, but it's too expensive. This way they won't have to make that choice, and it's easier for them to get that out of district education they need. And then it's important for the general population of our school districts because the school district can now use that money for other purposes. And so it frees that up. It's just an example of how in only its second year, I think, of paying through the Fair Share Amendment, we have a pot of money now that we can use to make a difference. And that will essentially save our taxpayers money.
I mean, you're so right, and it's been a huge success. I mean, thank you to the voters who voted in favor of the Fair Share Amendment a few years ago at the ballot. It's also known as the millionaire's tax. But this is really just asking folks in Massachusetts who make more than $1 million a year in income, to pay an additional 4% income tax. And then we, the legislature, have been, I think, very responsible in how we spend that money on public education and transportation. and that includes the special education circuit breaker that we just talked about. And something else that people may be interested in that we've also used that money for is to make sure we can provide universal free school meals for all of our kids in all our schools. They don't have to worry anymore about filling out forms and seeing if they qualify for reduced price lunches and the stigma associated with that, and then schools having to chase families to put on meal debt. Now that's all taken care of, and that's been saving families a lot of money. In difficult when families are pinched, that really helps. And the other thing I've heard also from our schools, which is unexpected, is it's improved the quality of the food they can serve, because now that more students are participating in the school meal program, they've been able to actually invest more, and so that's improved the quality and the healthfulness of the food.
Oh, that's an interesting consequence, huh? I think it's really important. You mentioned the stigma. That's important too, because kids don't have to raise their hand and somehow qualify and separate themselves from their classmates. So sometimes kids who would qualify just don't want to, because they don't want to be separated or identified in that way. And now kids have the opportunity to do that.
They may have gone without some meals, and again, we wouldn't be able to do the free school meals or the additional money for special education circuit breaker, or the money we're providing to help with early literacy programs for students, or what we're doing to make higher education more affordable, or all these things, if it wasn't for the Fair Share Amendment. So it's really been very successful.
Yeah. Now, another set of bills that we heard at our first hearing is something that resulted in policy being passed by the House through a budget policy that's now, I think, before the conference committee, because the Senate had one too, and they'll work it out. But we're interested in, as a standalone bill anyway, is a bill that's directed at students' rights or access to public school education K through 12. Now, this is something that, as a matter of the United States Supreme Court, we've had in place for decades, which is that every resident of the United States who is of a age that they would be in K through 12 have a right to public education. This is important not only from the point of view of the student and the family, that's obvious. I think it's important for the entire society, because if kids don't have a right to basic education, then what's left for them, right? What's left for them? You create an underclass, and you have other problems. So our bill says no matter the immigration status or the disability status, which is to say we'll find a place for kids to get the education that they need, they should have access to education. I was really proud that we both have the House and the Senate both have an interest in that bill.
Yeah, again, that was our very first hearing, of the session, and it was really, we heard very powerful testimony from some students and some teachers and advocates, just how important it is to continue to make sure that every kid, regardless of their immigration status, regardless of their disability, as you said, that they have access to a quality public education. And we sort of take that for granted because of that Supreme Court decision from early 1980s, Plyler v. Doe. But there are efforts in some states, some Republican-led states, to try to undermine that and get a case back to the Supreme Court. And I assume they think they can overturn it the same way they did with Roe v. Wade. So we want to get ahead of that, and that's why this legislation would make sure that we'd protect the access to education for all students, regardless of what might happen on the federal level.
Yeah, that's important. Another thing we heard, another set of bills we heard just this week, was the topic of Native American mascots in our public schools. And that was an instance where the testimony that I heard really made me think about, this works, our hearing system works, because the hesitation I have had, frankly, on that would be the control, the local control, a town or a city, but, saying, we vote, we chose this mascot, we've used it, it means something to us, it's kind of etched in our building, this is our identity. And one of our witnesses said, yeah, but your mascot comes to my town and plays against my kids, and my kids are uncomfortable or maybe offended because of that. And that meant something. That's true. Yeah. So it goes on within the borders of one place that made a choice, may be affecting another place. So
that's right. Yeah, and I know as state lawmakers, obviously we have to think about our individual communities that we represent and their interests, but we also have a responsibility to put on a hat to think about, especially you and I as chairs of this committee, the Education Committee, thinking about the impact more broadly across the entire state, how it impacts different types of communities. On not just the issue of the mascots, but on any of the issues that we deal with.
Yeah, yeah. Now, another issue that we've been working on that'll be coming up soon is, as we said, our committee deals with preschool. And so we've been working on a Common Start bill, which really reforms the way, in fact, this was put into, most of it was put into law in the last session, about 80% of what we've worked on.
Right.
So
that was a huge success that we got that bill, basically most of it passed and signed by the governor.
Yeah,
last year.
Yeah, and it stabilizes the funding for our preschools to provide better access. Both in urban areas where there's sort of been a desert, there's a lack of access because the schools aren't there, but also here in suburban areas to try to begin to make it affordable for families to use preschool education because it's so expensive.
Yeah.
So that really was a great success.
It's been great to work with you on this issue, Representative Gordon. We both totally get the fact that how wise an investment it is to make in our youngest children. Because if you provide a quality preschool, for a child as 1, 2, 3-year-old, they're ready when they start kindergarten. They're going to have better success in school and frankly in life. And we see a lot of evidence for that. And conversely, if they don't get that high quality early education, particularly if they're from a disadvantaged background, you're going to see the impact of that later on in that child's development and the issues they're going to have. So it's really important, and I know we get that, and it was great to see how many of our colleagues have kind of come along, and now this is sort of really one of the highest priorities for us and for the Governor Healy.
Right.
And we've made I think we've when I last looked at the budget, I think we've almost doubled the amount of funding that now the state puts into early education and child care, which is really a great, and again, much of that thanks to the Fair Share Amendment. Yeah. But that really shows that we are trying to make a real difference here.
Yeah, it's a great accomplishment, and it's again one of those things that we could look at it from the point of view of the family and the child. As you said, once you get that head start, you keep it. But also, it has an immediate impact on our economy because we have so many employers, including here, for example, Leahy Health, that are looking for labor, and there are so many people that can't work because they've got a preschool-aged child, and it costs so much for them to get care that what they can earn in some jobs is just not worth it.
Yep, absolutely. So it's really important for our employers, for our economy, for working families to be able to earn that income. And the other thing we should point out is we're actually, when we talk about this topic, of course, we're not just talking about birth to age 5, preschool. We're also talking about out of school time. So when children are in elementary school and their parents or guardians need care for those children after school, before school, during vacation, that's also part of this. So when we've increased resources to provide more access to care that's affordable, that includes for out of school time also.
Yeah. Now, another issue that we're going to be dealing with a little bit later in the session is the issue of the aftermath of ballot question 2, which was the one that untied the MCAS graduation, the MCAS results to the graduation requirement. Because now in the legislature we're looking at, so we don't have a reliable test anymore to be able to compare district to district. Is a B in one district the same thing as a B in another? And what do our employers, what do they think, or what can they, how can they rely on grades from one place to another, or the fact that someone has someone mastered English and math and science, basic English, math, and science from one district or another? How does that work? We have a commission that's doing its work, and we're going to work with that commission, but ultimately we're looking for a solution to another tool that we can reliably identify districts. And I think from our point of view, we want to know what districts need help. We do have money coming from the Fair Share Amendment. Where can we best spend it to identify these students that aren't able to pass the test, if that's what it is? Do we need help? We can certainly talk about amending the test, or having some tool where we can look at some kids, they don't take tests well, okay, let's look at a tool that addresses that. Let's look at certain needs of kids. Let's address that.
Yeah.
But we've got to come up with something.
We've got to do something, right? Because obviously the voters spoke last year, and so we no longer have the use of the 10th grade MCAS scores to determine whether a student gets a diploma. Right. So, Governor Healy, the beginning of this year, she created a working group, and they're charged with kind of coming back to the Education Committee and the rest of the legislature with recommendations as to kind of what we should put in place of the MCAS. And of course, we have a few bills pending in our committee that have also been filed on this topic as well. So I think I'm looking forward to reviewing those bills, having feedback from all the stakeholders, especially students and parents and teachers and administrators, and then getting the recommendations from that council, which I think we're expecting by the end of the year.
Right.
And so that means hopefully by early next year, certainly before the end of the session, we'll be able to hopefully decide within the Education Committee, what we want to put forward to the rest of our colleagues as an alternative system to determine how a student gets a diploma in Massachusetts, from Massachusetts high schools, public high schools.
So we certainly have enough to do. That's for sure. What are the other issues before the committee that are of interest to you?
One issue that's always been of interest to me. In fact, it was the issue I originally one of the issues prompted me to even run for the state legislature, which was when my own kids, who are now graduated, but when they were getting started in kindergarten, and I was volunteering on the finance committee in the town of Winchester, and I started to sort of really dig into how we fund public schools in Massachusetts. And it's a complicated system, but basically we have a formula. It's known as the Chapter 70 formula, and that determines how much state aid Burlington gets, and how much state aid Winchester gets, and how much Brockton gets, and Holyoke, and every community, every school district. And it's it's something that has challenges with it, and we actually made some major updates to that formula when we passed the Student Opportunity Act a few years ago, and that's made a positive difference. But I'm strongly of the belief that we need to revisit that formula yet again, and there are additional things we need to look at to make sure that all of our school districts, regardless of whether it's an urban, suburban community, rural community, that they all are getting the support that they need, to make sure every kid has access to a high quality school, which is the goal, I know we share. So I am interested in kind of how do we kick off that process. It's, and it's one that's, it's a can of worms when you reopen any formula, but I'm certainly hopeful we can get that ball rolling, this session.
Yeah, so this is a decades-old formula that basically determines that every student in Massachusetts has a right to a foundational level of funding towards their public education. And in order to reach that foundational level, there's a division between what the municipality must contribute and what the state will then contribute. And in some municipalities where the property values are lower than others, so that means that the municipality doesn't have the ability to contribute as much, the state pays more.
Right.
But everybody gets something under the formula. And so, as you said, it might be that the way that this is all played out, and also, by the way, municipalities can then give more.
Yes.
And out here most do.
Most affluent communities do put,
Right, this is a floor.
More.
This foundation level is a floor. So they'll give more. But we can look at how we determine within the foundational, but how this works
that's
these
the idea.
municipalities. It's interesting because in Western Massachusetts, where we have declining population, those schools are really faced with a challenge of how do you fund schools with a very small population. One way you can do it is to get together and regionalize. But they've been operating their own schools for decades. And it's a hard situation to face.
It's one of the hardest things to kind of give up that local control. But we have over 320 school districts in Massachusetts, and our student population a little bit less than 1 million students. So that's a lot of school districts for a student population of that size.
Yeah, it really is.
But politically, very challenging to get districts to think about joining together,
Yeah. Now, outside of the committee, there's something that you've been working on that I'm happy to support now. Really helps cable access channels like BCAT with their funding, because over time a lot of people have gone into streaming services, and the way that a cable channel is funded is through the cable the contract with the cable company and the municipality. Well, when you have, when people go over to streaming, the payments aren't coming in in the same way. And so where I think people still have access to go online and watch the content at BCAT, which they should. Yes. There's a lot of valuable content there. I think it's only fair that the streaming services that provide the type of information, in other words, we're talking about the ones where you can get your basic channels, contribute to that.
Yep, that's the idea exactly. It's just really fairness. Community media or local cable access is a really special thing in Massachusetts. It doesn't exist everywhere in the country, but it's very special that we have this in so many of our communities. And it's become even more important since the pandemic, because covering all of the government meetings, whether it's a city council, select board, school committee, planning board, making sure that the public knows. In many cases, enabling the public to participate remotely, right, in these meetings, which has really expanded access and transparency is really important. But again, thanks to that community media stations. And for a long time, they've been funded through those modest, the fees that the cable companies, the Verizons, the Comcasts of the world pay to the municipalities. But people are cutting the cord on cable, going over to Netflix or Hulu or other streaming, and so that revenue stream just continues to decline, and that's why we've proposed this bill that would just ask the streaming services to include it would be a very modest fee on the subscribers, and then again that would allow us to continue to fund our community media stations.
Yeah, for me it would be those streaming services like, for example, I think it's YouTube TV, the ones that replace the cable. As opposed to supplement the cable, because that's where you're losing that. And that's where, for the benefit of the community, it's not really fair, because with the contraction of the media, it used to be here in Burlington that you had the Woburn paper focused on it.
Right.
You had the other media where you could get your information. It's not there anymore. So I think for me, the primary source of information has been right here at BCAT, covering local events. And people can go into the website, they can see archived so much information that's kept here, because
it's really important to transparency, right? And so people know what the government's up to.
Yeah,
and community events, everything that's going on in the community.
Yeah, we have the focus of a different show, but we have an ICE detention center here in Burlington that's attracted a lot of attention.
Yeah, I bet.
And so part of it is, what can the municipality do, if anything? And it's a difficult question, because the supremacy clause of the Constitution gives the federal government a lot of power. But to find out what happened back in 2006 when they came into Burlington, it was BCAT's archives that has really been a tremendous help in recreating promises that were made, representations that were made, and expectations that were made. We couldn't do without.
Very interesting. Yeah. That's I hadn't even thought about that, the value of the archive.
Right, so we couldn't do it without that, and that's why this is really something that we should be supporting.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm thrilled to have your support, and I'm very hopeful. Last session, the bill did get out of the committee favorably, which was a step forward, and hopefully this session it'll get even further, maybe across the finish line.
Well, thank you. I think that's important, and we ought to do it. We've come to the end of our half hour. It kind of goes quickly, especially a conversation like this with you, because all these interesting topics. And education it's so important to all of us, to Massachusetts, to our community, because it's why many of our businesses come to this state. They want access to our educated workforce at every level, our higher education, but also kids who are graduating from our general high schools, education high schools, and also our vocational schools. And our community colleges, and we have that now, and we've got to protect that. We've got to support it and identify ways that we can make it even better. So,
absolutely, that's our real competitive advantage for Massachusetts, and which makes it one of the main things that makes our communities a great place to live and raise a family.
Right.
Thanks for having me. It's a great conversation.
Thanks for being here. I'm really glad that you came to talk to the folks. And folks, we will see you next time on Rappin' with the Rep.